Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've recently got a bunch of questions, like 3 or 4 in the last couple of weeks, from viewers wanting me to address how to approach featureless lakes. What am I looking for, as well as what bait should I be throwing if I'm fishing a featureless lake? And what I mean by featureless lakes, and these are located around the country. I have run into these all over the place. A lot of times they're generally smaller, more pothole type lakes. But we're talking about a lake that's got very, very little depth change, if any at all, no sharp contour lines, and very little cover. No weeds, no wood, no rock. They're basically like sand pits or gravel pits with no cover or structure in them. And because of that, they can be intimidating bodies of water to fish. They are one of those things where if you get out there, you don't even know where to begin because of the fact there's nothing to begin on. So I've got a couple of tips for you that you're going to want to utilize when you head out to a featureless lakes, as well as some of my favorite baits. Ultimately, the first tip is going to be you want to cover water. A lot of these lakes are going to be maybe 8, 10, 12 foot in the center, and they're just straight, steady drops into the middle of the lake. And because of that, there's no cover. So you want to cover as much water as possible because the fish that are in these lakes tend to be roamers. They don't really have that home base. They don't have a stump or a rock pile to hang out by. So they, generally speaking, like to roam. A lot of these lakes are going to have some bait fish in them that get pushed around quite a bit by the wind as well. So if you've had a strong south wind for a few days, you might want to look at the north side of the lake because those fish that are roamers will roam with the bait fish that move to one side of the lake. That's definitely something that I've seen happen here on the lakes in Wisconsin. There are a lot of lakes like that that are these featureless pothole lakes in Wisconsin. And I'll tell you what, some of them have absolute giant largemouth and smallmouth in them. One of them has quickly become one of my favorite lakes to fish, and it doesn't have a stitch of cover in it. It maxes out at 9 feet deep, to the point where I often wonder how that lake can support the population of fish that it does when you're talking about having 2 feet of ice on the top of it during the winters. And I've always wondered how there is not a dissolved oxygen issue where we have winter kills on this lake, but it produces giant bass of both species. So therefore they're doing just fine. But it's one of those lakes you get to, and the only way you can locate those fish is really to find where they've rotated to in the lake, because they don't hold on any cover at all. So I'm always going to be throwing fast moving baits, trying to cover a bunch of water. The next thing is to try to identify any sort of change in the bottom, whether that's bottom composition. Maybe you've got a 6-inch or a foot drop off. So it's something that normally would be so minute that you wouldn't pay any attention to, but the fish in these lakes are actually hanging out on that small drop. And the other thing would be maybe you do have some sort of cover in that lake. As an example, one of the lakes I fish here in Wisconsin, there was one time out, it's a gin clear body of water. I was in maybe 5, 6 foot of water, and I saw a branch. And by branch, I'm talking a 3-foot long branch that had one Y in it, so it split. One of those Ys stuck off the bottom about a foot. It was maybe that big around. I mean, we're talking a small branch. Somehow wandered its way out about 100 yards offshore, probably actually 200 yards offshore. And I just stumbled upon it. And I didn't stumble upon it because I saw the branch. I saw 2 fish hanging out by that branch. Over the course of the day, I went by that branch, I think 3 or 4 times, and I caught a total of 5 fish off that branch. So every time I caught one, I'd come back a little bit later, and there was a new fish that was hanging out by that stupid little branch. And that just shows how, no matter what lake you're on, every little piece of cover can make a big difference. So in this case, on a featureless lake, you're looking for those tiny changes. A lot of times it's a bottom composition thing. You probably don't have much rock in these lakes, but you may go from a soft sand to a gravelly type sand, and that can be a bottom composition change. Maybe there's 1 or 2 sprigs of grass somewhere, and the fish would hold to that. So just keep in mind that even though what you find in that lake may normally not be anything that would interest you on another lake, it probably is worth fishing on these featureless lakes. The other thing I'm going to point out too is just simply that you cannot I cannot overemphasize how important it is to be willing to rotate with the fish, meaning you may go there one day and the fish are on the west shore. You may go there the next time and the west shore is completely void of fish. And you may not understand why they're not there anymore, but you got to be willing to rotate and to cover water to try to find where those fish are at. So when you head out to the lake, there's a bunch of baits that I think are really worth looking at. Like I said, it's all about covering water for me. A lot of times these lakes generally have a little bit clearer water in them. And because of that, you're trying to cover water and draw fish to your cast, meaning if you can throw a bait and make a cast every 30 or 40 feet, you want to have good draw power to your bait. So you're bringing fish from 15 feet from each side. And one of the best baits to do that is a jerk bait. This is the Berkeley Stunna in what is quickly becoming one of my favorite colors, the Northern Lights color. I'll put a link to all these baits in the video description in case you guys want to check it out. But a jerk bait is a great bait no matter what time of year, it drawing fish to it. And in these shallow lakes that have no cover, no features to it, it's hard to beat a jerk bait. Along those same lines would be a lipless crankbait like this Berkeley War Pig. It's all about covering water quick, and there's days where they want a fast retrieve. And if you can get away burning a lipless crankbait over these shallow flats, because a lipless crankbait is ultimately one of the best flats baits that we have. When you're talking about a featureless lake, it's nothing more than one giant flat. A lipless crankbait is one of the best baits at triggering those strikes. I personally like to throw it out, burn it back a ways, stop it, kill it, maybe twitch it, burn it some more. And I'll impart a little bit of stops here and there to trigger those reaction strikes, but ultimately I'm just trying to cover a lot of water, because once you've identified where the fish might be holding and what part of the lake, that's when you can think about starting to slow down a little bit and concentrate in that area. And it almost seems like the fish will keep coming to you, regardless of species. Largemouth, smallmouth, doesn't really matter. It's more about trying to locate as fast as possible where they're holding on that day. And those two baits are great ones at doing it. Now, there's some days where it seems like they don't want to commit to a jerk bait or a lipless. It's just a little bit too aggressive. Maybe the conditions don't dictate a real good reaction strike. That's when I like to go with a small swim bait, and I will reel this a lot slower than I would say the jerk bait, but they find it a lot harder to turn down a small swim bait like this 3-3 Kitech Fat Impact paired up with a Dirty Jigs Matt Stefan Guppy head. It's really just a very good bait for those days when maybe you're getting followers on the jerk bait, maybe you're getting taps on the lipless crankbait, but they're not committing. That's when I like to go with that little swim bait. And again, you're talking about a bait that you can still cover good water in. You're not looking at throwing anything that's super heavy. You're throwing the 1/8 ounce or 3/16 ounce size, and you're just covering water, keeping the bait in the middle of the water column as it's coming through. Maybe you're in 6-8 foot of water, your bait's down a couple feet. That is perfect under those conditions. The fish will come up and eat that. Now, one of my favorites out there, and this is probably something that you wouldn't consider, is a jig. Specifically, this is a casting jig. So this is the Dirty Jigs Luke Clausen casting jig. I've got a Berkeley Maxcent chunk on the back. The reason I love a casting jig is because it's, in my opinion, the best type of jig to use for stroking jigs, meaning I'm throwing this out, making a long cast, and I'm snapping my rod hard to get my bait to shoot off the bottom and fall back down. I've done a lot of videos on stroking jigs, and I'll put a video at the end of this so that you can check it out for yourself if you're not familiar with it. But it's one of the best ways to generate strikes if you're fishing big flats. It doesn't matter if it's got some grass on it or if it's a bare flat. It's one of those techniques that generates really aggressive reaction strikes. And when the fish can see your bait really good, the key is to explode this off the bottom. Because if you can explode it off the bottom, no matter how good they see it and how much they know it's something they don't want to eat, they sometimes just cannot help themselves. Like, it's just that reaction strike. So a jig, specifically a casting jig, is one that I would definitely go with. Lastly, we've got here a Ned. This is just a Z-Man Finesse TRD in what is one of my favorite colors for fishing these types of lakes. This is Drew's Craw. It's kind of a mixture. It's got like a sand color to a green pumpkin colored back. Works really good anytime you're fishing around sand. And then I've got mixed up with a Z-Man Finesse Shrooms head. Ultimately, I'm going to be fishing this similar to how I fish the jig, meaning I'm looking to create reaction strikes. So what I do with this is I throw it way out, make a long cast, let it fall to the bottom, let it sit for a second or two, and then I crank it about a quarter of the way back to the boat, let it fall back to the bottom, let it sit for a second or two. I crank it about halfway back to the boat, let it fall to the bottom. So I'm letting this fall 3 or 4 times per cast. I'm just trying to simulate that initial entrance into the water because that's where you're going to get the majority of the bites on a Ned rig like this. So the point being, I'm still looking to generate reaction strikes from fish that probably can see my bait pretty well, similar to how I'd be fishing the jig, but it also allows me to slow down if I do find the areas where I'm getting a lot of fish, either catching a lot of fish on some of the reaction baits, or I'm getting a lot of followers. It's a bait that I can slow down. It's a little less intimidating and generates a lot of strikes. So if you happen to live near one of these featureless lakes, I highly recommend checking them out for a bunch of different reasons. One, they're a lot less pressured because anglers don't like to fish them as much because you don't know necessarily where to start. And a lot of times they have some really big fish in them because they don't get much pressure. In those shallow, flat type lakes, the fish generally need to eat quite a bit. They don't necessarily have the same cover to sit by, and it just tends to grow some giants. So if you can get past the fact that there's not much cover to fish, not much bottom contour to fish, there are some really big fish swimming around in them. So check them out. Hopefully this answers the questions that the viewers asked me. I love fishing these lakes. One of the lakes I'm thinking about here in Wisconsin is quickly becoming one of my favorites. It's a good one just to head out and fish around on. A topwater bait can be a great choice as well. I didn't mention one here, but under the right conditions, a topwater bait can be a really good bait to throw. So hopefully I answered your questions. If I did and you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.